and I usually don't say anything because I know that I am going to speak. So I guess this is always the best time to introduce myself. So I am Amos, and I live in Atlanta. And I thank God for what He has done throughout my day. It was a good day. I accomplished a lot of things. I thank God for the strength, the guidance, blessing, the joy.
Amen.
I thank Him for everything, and just to be alive, as many of you said, just to be alive and healthy. It's always a Thanksgiving, so I thank God for all the good He has done for me. All right, so we are going to go into the Word of God. So today is going to be a little bit different. I want this to be a little bit like a discussion more than a preaching, because there is a difference between teaching and also preaching. So today I'm going to try to involve people or you guys. So whenever I pose a question, just be ready to answer me or engage. So I am not going to take a long time. I'm just going to share a story or the Word of God, and then later I'm going to ask for questions. So as we go through the Bible, as we go through the teaching, just if you can, write down a question, and then when it's time, when I give out time to ask questions, then it will be good to just go over to the questions that you wrote down and ask a question. And later, if you have a question that does not relate to what we are going to talk about today, it's fine to ask that. So if time permits. So we are going to look into the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 50 is where I'm going to focus on. Book of Genesis. So I'm sure everyone knows where Genesis is. Just the word Genesis it's actually a Greek word that means first. So it's the very first book of the Bible. So Genesis chapter 50 and verse 20 is where I'm going to focus on. Genesis 50 and verse 20. So before we read that, I'm going to tell you the story that ends with that verse. So starting with chapter, to get the full story, starting with Genesis chapter 37 all the way to chapter 50, it talks about the story of Joseph and who Joseph was and where he came from. So Joseph was a son, one of the 12 children that God blessed Jacob. And Jacob, as many of you may have known, he was the son of Adam. He was he was the son of Isaac. So Isaac had two children. He had Esau, and he also had Jacob. And Esau was the one that was going to get the blessing from his dad, Isaac. So it was a tradition that every time when a dad is about to pass away or about to die, he would give his blessing of being a dad to the oldest son. And this was a tradition to kind of like symbolize that when I go away, when I die, this that I'm going to bless is going to take my place. He will be kind of like a dad to the family. He will be the provider. He will be the one that will do many things that a dad does in a family. And that's why in the old time, a dad had a very important position in a family, and even up to today, I mean, like in today's society, things have changed, and many people have tried to go against the Bible in many ways. So I don't think a dad has the position as in the old time, and you know, obligations and responsibilities have been limited or have been taken away from and be placed to a mother. So, I mean, a father had a very important role to play when it comes to providing and also guiding the family to what's best. So here we see that Isaac was about to die and had to bless one of his two children that he had, Esau and Jacob. Esau was the oldest, and Jacob was the second. And when Isaac was about to die, he couldn't see. He was like in bed, and he could not see, or all about every day he would stay in bed because all his bones were weak, and his body in general was just very weak. He could not walk on him by himself, and many things he could not just do. So he laid in bed most of the time. And when time came for him to bless one of his children, Rebecca, the wife of Isaac, or the mother of Jacob, wanted Jacob to be the one that needs to be blessed. Now, Jacob was a good cook, and Esau was a shepherd. And one time, when Esau was taking care of the flocks, just trying to be a shepherd, when Esau was taking care of the flock, and Jacob, on the other hand, at home cooking, there was a time that Esau got home and he was very hungry and needed food. And so when he got home, he could not get food until Jacob had his request met. And the request from Jacob was, I can only give you food if you give me your birthright. Basically, if you make me to be your older brother instead of being your younger brother. Esau, I think I would say that Esau was not very wise, so he went ahead and did that. So he traded his birthright for food. And when that happened, later on, we see that Rebecca tricks Isaac to bless Jacob to have the blessing of a father for being the firstborn. So now we see that the blessing that was supposed to be given to Esau, and from there, after Isaac blessed Jacob, Jacob became a blessed man. And I can tell you, right after Jacob was blessed, the name of Esau is not mentioned in many places. It's not mentioned at all. So it's very crucial to pay attention to what God has blessed you and to always take hold of it so that nobody will snatch it from you. Because once that blessing is taken away from you, there's no return. There is no return. So right after when we saw that throughout the story, when Jacob was blessed, he went along, married, and had children. So in the children that he had 12 children, and God blessed him for sure. And there was a time that he even fought with an angel of the Lord. One time when when the angel of the Lord visited him, and he could not let go of the angel until the angel blessed him. So yeah, that's a different part. But I will tell you that God, the blessing that was intended for Esau, Jacob took it, and from that God blessed him, and God used him in different ways. So among the blessing, he had 12 children, and in the 12 children, it was like the 11th child, which is Joseph, is the one that we are going to be reading about. And about all his children were also blessed. But Joseph seemed to be the chosen one, and God blessed him even more than the other one. So to focus on the story of Joseph. So Joseph was a dreamer. Joseph dreamed. That was one of his ability. That was one of his talents that God had given him. So a lot of time when he's at home, he would dream about things, and he would take them to his dad for explanation and things like that. And he was also kind of like a supervisor to his brothers. So he would go to his brother because he was like the youngest. He was like one down to the youngest. So he only had one younger brother, and everyone else were older than him. And his younger brother was Benjamin. So Joseph didn't have a lot of role to play as in terms of providing for the family and things like that. All the other ones, the older ones, were the ones that were taking care of the flock, buying things that are needed in the house and things like that. So a lot, and when he needed to, when the brothers were out in the forest or in the bush taking care of the flock, when time came for him to take food to his brothers, he would take the food to his brothers and things like that. So, but because he was kind of like considered as a supervisor, like to supervise what the brothers will be doing, and I will tell you, some of his brothers were very, bad brothers for sure. Because if you when we read in the Bible, in the book, it talks about how some of them just had minds to do evil, just evil things. So some of his brothers were good, some of his brothers were just, evil in their minds. So there was a time that Joseph took food to his brothers, and when his brothers saw him from far away, they started talking about him. See, he was a dreamer, and his brothers knew him as a dreamer. And most of the time, the dreams that he dreamed about were not like dreams that his brothers took seriously, or were things that would bless them or give them happiness that they want. Most of the time, the dreams that he would bring to them were things to warn them, things to be aware of, and his brothers did not like this kind of dreams. So he was a dreamer. So when they saw him bringing food to them from far away, they started planning and trying to find a way to kill him, because to them he was like an enemy, because everything that he saw his brothers doing, he took it to his father and reported to his father. So he was kind of like a supervisor in a way, supervising his older brothers. So they started hating his brother. They did not like his brother for what he was and who he was. And from time to time, he would also, take care of the flocks and things like that. But when time came, they wanted to kill him, and they made plans in order to kill him. And the Bible tells us that Joseph was like the favorite son that Jacob had. And we see that one of the symbols that symbolized the chosen one or the blessed one was his garment. He had a garment that had like 12 different colors, very beautiful, beautiful garment, and he was admired by his brothers as well. So Joseph was a blessed person for sure, but to his brothers, he was like an enemy. So when time came, they made plans to kill him, but as they were thinking of killing him or crucifying him or just doing something bad to him, they thought of just selling him. But before selling him, they dug a hole to put him in there and also kill him in. So basically they were thinking that when we put him in a hole that he cannot climb and take himself out of the hole, he would just stay there and go hungry, and after a while he would die from hunger. So they dug a hole and they thought of throwing him in there, and at the same time they thought of killing one of the sheep and use the blood of the sheep to spill it over the cloth that Joseph wore every time that his dad gave him. So they thought of pouring the blood on top of the garment and take it to his dad and tell the dad that Joseph has been eaten by an animal or killed. So they made plans to kill him. But the Bible tells us that as they were thinking of killing him and throwing him in a hole, Reuben, which is the older brother, told his brothers, instead of killing him, let's just sell him. Let's just sell him to people, because during that time there was a lot of slavery. There was a lot of people being used for trading to make money, basically. So when the idea was brought to the attention of selling him, they saw the Midianites, which were people, very rich people who traded, people for money. So when they saw these Midianites coming their way or coming to where they were, they, made a deal with the Midianites, and Joseph was sold to Egypt like that. Actually, he was sold to the Midianites, and then the Midianites made profit of him, selling him as another slave to the Egyptian Pharaoh. And from there, you see Joseph as a slave and also working and forgetting all the good that he had back home. It took a lot of time. A lot of time, there is always temptations that come our way. And sometimes temptations may be in a family. Temptations may come through people that are outside of your family. But temptations are always there and exist every time. So Joseph was sold to the Egyptian, worked as a slave, and to be honest, working as a slave is not a joke. You are working, beaten, eating, like a dog, basically, and being treated like the very, very lowest person to exist. So living as a slave wasn't a good life, but Joseph persevered through the temptation throughout the whole time that he was serving there. And even though he saw himself as a slave, he considered himself as someone that was worth more than a slave. And he did everything diligently, and he did everything that he was commanded to do as working for God. Basically, Joseph is another example to tell us that in every situation that we put ourselves in, sometimes puts ourselves into those situations, and sometimes just the devil put us in temptation. So whatever the position or whatever the place that you may be, even though it may be difficult, do whatever you are commanded to do as doing it to the Lord, not to the humans. Mm-hmm. He could have done whatever he wanted as a slave, like disobeying or not doing whatever that he was asked to do. He could have done whatever he would prefer or whatever would be the easiest for him. But the Bible tells us that instead he used humility to do whatever that he was commanded, whatever he was asked to do. And because of that, God honored him, God blessed him. And one time, as a slave, basically, he was known throughout the prison as a dreamer. Like he would dream something and he would tell his slave friends and things like that, and his friends would have a dream. They would come to him. He would translate the dream for them, and so forth. So one time, Pharaoh had a dream. Pharaoh, who is the king of all the slaves and all the people throughout Egypt. So he had a dream. He had a dream of wheat. I'm not sure if everyone know how wheat look like when it's growing, but wheat looks like a tree when it's growing. So he saw wheat looking healthy, and then cows looking like they're not healthy. Like this is how the dream was. Like the cows looked very skinny, and the wheat looked very healthy, looking grains. And he could not understand what this dream meant. So the slaves, knowing that Joseph was a dreamer and he was like a dreams translator, they reported to Pharaoh, telling him that, yes, we have someone here who may be able to translate your dream. All his wise people, all Pharaoh's wise people and magician. Oh yeah, this was time from Egypt, as many of you may have known or read about from history and things like that. Egypt is full of magical stuff, and it's full of idol worship. Egypt is known to be one of the number one country in the world that has many gods in one country. So Egypt has been an idol worship country for many years, and during this time as well. So Pharaoh called his magicians, he called his advisors, he called consuls, many different types of people to translate the dream that he had, and all of them could not do it. All of them could not translate or give a meaning of the dream that made sense to Pharaoh. So when the word got to Joseph that the king Pharaoh is looking for him to translate the dream, he went. He responded to the request and went to the palace. Just imagine, like, having those rubbish clothing, being out there, stinky, and your teeth not brushed for like maybe 50 days or something. He was not in good shape, but still Pharaoh wanted to accept him to see if he can be able to translate the dream. So he came into the palace and was told about the dream, and right after he heard of the whole dream, he was able to translate the dream, telling Pharaoh that time is coming. Time is coming that you need to gather around everything that is grainy, everything that has grain, wheat, maize, or corn. Many people say corn, or rice. It's time to gather anything that is grain and put it in a place where it can be lasted for 7 years. And this is not a time to care about the flocks that you have or the cows that you have. It's time to focus on anything that has grain in it. And this is how he told Pharaoh about his dream. Basically, for 7 years, we need to focus on planting whatever has grain and not focusing on things that have flesh or cows or things that have blood. Or I'm sure that they had chicken or they had sheep or they had all these things. But he was telling them that we need to focus on keeping our grains so that we can be able to have food for later, because famine or a drought is coming into the land of Egypt. So doing this, keeping safe of anything great, anything that has grain, will help you be able to have food once the famine comes. And this kind of like made sense because, in his dream, he saw wheat looking fatter. Wheat looked fat, and the cows looked very skinny, like they had not been eating for 7 days or 20. Cows did not look healthy, and when Joseph translated the dream, it just made sense to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh commanded everybody to do as Joseph has told them. And I tell you that after this dream was translated, Pharaoh was happy and he won favor. Joseph won favor of Pharaoh. And we see in the next story that instead of him living as a slave, he welcomed him to live in his palace, to be the one that will be the chairperson, to rule over all the farmers, making sure that the grain is put into the proper storage, and he was like a commander, like he was a man in chief now, because of that dream. But the Bible also tells us that as he was being brought into the palace, another temptation came about, and this temptation was Pharaoh's wife. Pharaoh's wife saw Joseph as a handsome person, a handsome guy, and with that, he wanted to win him over, forcefully. Like she wanted to do something to cause Joseph like some type of problems, but Joseph knew about it, and he knew that this even though this lady is like the second in rulership after Pharaoh, I need to stay away from her as much as possible. I need to be very careful around her. And so one time, after she had tried so many times, she went into Joseph's room and locked the door and tried to cause Joseph into sexual sins. And when Joseph knew about it, he somehow made loud noise, and when the guards came to look after the noise that was happening in the palace, they found that the Pharaoh's wife Potiphar was trying to commit a sexual sin with Joseph. And the way the Bible doesn't tell us all the details, but the guards, when they came and saw the situation, they saw that Potiphar was trying to forcefully put Joseph into a temptation, into these sexual sins. And when each one explained their side, Joseph explained the situation, and Potiphar at the same time explained the situation. But I tell you that Joseph, whatever he had, he explained. And once again, the Bible doesn't tell us everything that he explained, but he told them that this lady has been trying to put me into this sexual sin for many times. And as you can see, she was trying to do it again. And however he explained the situation, Joseph was found to be truthful. And after that, we see that God continued blessing him. I'm telling you that if he had fallen into that temptation, he wouldn't been like the blessed person that we see in the next chapters. So Joseph was blessed, and throughout his time, God saw him as a tool. He saw him as someone that can save many people out there. But many people, as we see, saw him as a different person. His brothers saw him as someone that they can make profit out of. And the Midianites saw him as someone that can be a product to be sold for more money. And over here, Pharaoh saw him as a dreamer, as someone who is important, someone who is knowledgeable, someone who is wise. And at the same time, Potiphar saw him as a handsome guy, someone that he wanted to do something bad with, or to commit a sexual sin with. So he was viewed as a different person throughout his journey. And the Bible tells us that when famine came, Joseph was given even higher ranks to be second in chief after Pharaoh. He was like the Pharaoh, but one person above him. So Pharaoh was the only one who was above him. So basically, he could command Pharaoh's wife, or he could command anyone who was below Pharaoh, except commanding Pharaoh, obviously. So he was given a very higher rank throughout Egypt, and everyone in the world knew about him, and everyone knew who Joseph was because of the blessings that he was given. And the Bible tells us that when famine came, and this famine that we are told about was everywhere in the world except for Egypt. So everyone in the world had no food to eat, but only Egypt. I cannot tell you how many countries were discovered around that time, but the Bible tells us that there were many. There were many countries. I don't think there were 196 that we are told that we have today, in the whole world, 196 countries. I believe there were a lot of countries, and every one of those countries had famine except for Egypt. So this was like a miracle. This was a blessing for 7 years. Just imagine, for 7 years going through hunger, not having food to eat for 7 years. And over here in Egypt, everyone is eating healthy. Everyone is eating well. Why? Because they listened. They listened to the dream. And God, when God speaks, He speaks of truth. God will never turn away from anything that He says. God spoke to Egypt in a way of saving them through Joseph. So God can use anyone to save any situation, to save anybody from harm or from anything that may be coming. So when God blessed Joseph, and Joseph got to a higher rank, and the next story, the next chapter, we see that in his father's land, famine got there as well, and his brothers came to Egypt. I'm telling you that everyone in the world around this time had to go to Egypt to buy food from there. Egypt was the only country that had food. So when Joseph's brother came looking for food as well, they begged looking for food. They begged if they can have even a little bit to be sold to. But Joseph, when he saw his brothers, the Bible tells us that he felt a connection to them. He felt somehow relating to them. And he then realized, these are my brothers who sold me as a slave. These are who like he only had one younger brother out of 12 children. So when his brothers came, it was like the 10 children who were above him who came looking for food, and his dad was I don't think he was still alive around that time, but his dad was at home, and the mother and things like that. So they left whoever that was still alive at home, and the brothers came, and only so I'm sure the mother was also alive, because they left Benjamin, the younger brother, with whoever who was home. Sometimes the Bible doesn't give us all the details, but I believe around that time his dad was also alive. When the brothers told him, yes, we need food, please sell us food, he told them, I can only sell you food if you return back home and bring your younger brother. So he said your younger brother because he didn't want to show himself right away that he belongs to them. So he told them, go and bring your younger brother Benjamin. And when they brought Benjamin, he was able to sell them food. Not only was he he wasn't only able to give them food, but he created a feast and presented these brothers to Pharaoh, telling Pharaoh, these are my brothers. See, all this happened because he felt a connection. If someone relates to you by blood, there's always this like chemical connection. Like when you see them, there's like this something that connects to them that will never be departed. So even though they did him wrong, he felt a connection to them, and he understood that these are my brothers. Even though it was like, 20 years after they sold him, he still remembered them and knew that they were his brothers. And when Benjamin came, they went into the palace, and they basically had a feast. Joseph celebrated with Pharaoh and all the servants in the palace about his brothers, about him finding his brothers. So this is where I end. So Genesis chapter 50 verse 20, the Bible tells us, the Bible says, so this is what he told his brothers. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So his brothers did him so much good, so much hate. And throughout the process, Joseph persevered, and Joseph knew that even though I'm going through a tough time, God has a reason for me to go through this. And he kept going. Mm-hmm. And it was until later when he saw the favor of God coming upon him, that's when he saw all these little things, all these things, him getting sold, him getting getting tempted, and him getting into just lots of situations, and him being a slave and things like that. When he saw all these little connections, when he was blessed already, that's when he started saying that, oh God, even though I went through that tough time back then, it was so you can get me to this level of being prosperous, of being second in command.
Amen.
God, thank you. So this is what he's saying. You know, he was seen or was done so many evil, and everything that the world, people in the world did to him, against him, all the wrongdoings. It was a process for him. It was a process for what God intended for him to be accomplished. See, sometimes God may put us in situations that are not comfortable, and it's up to us to persevere through it. It's up to us to see that even though I am going through this tough time, there is a reason behind this. There is a reason why I am going through this situation. See, God never wastes our time of sorrow. If you go through sorrow, God is not going to waste that, and God is going to remember it. God is going to put it as a record, and it's only when you see Him connecting everything, that's when you say to yourself, aha, that's why I was going through that tough time. That's why I was going through that rough time. That's why that person did so much wrong to me. See, all this happens when you respond good to evil. See, sometimes the world teaches us that if someone does wrong to you, you should respond to them with wrong. When someone hits you, you should hit them back. When someone curses you, you should curse them back. But that's not the way of God. The way of God is basically to, if someone does you wrongdoing, do them bad. If someone does you a wrongdoing, do them good. And this is what Joseph did. Even though the brothers told him and hated him and left him in the hole for him to die, even though he was sold as a slave, even though he was like a king, but now had to walk like a slave. In his father's house, he was a favorite. Jacob did so much good to him, so he had a good life in his father's house. But now, because of his brothers who hated him, he had to go through a life that it was just treacherous. It was rough. But even though they did all these bad things to him, he didn't just say, all right, you need to go back home. You need to die from hunger. You need to go back home and eat whatever you have. I cannot sell you food. Basically paying them back with evil. But he didn't do that. He gave them food. And in addition to giving them food, and they didn't pay, by the way. He gave them food, whereas everyone else who was coming to Egypt to buy food had to pay. But these ones, because they were brothers, because they were people who had a connection to Joseph's past, he knew he had to give to them more than he gives to everyone else. He created even a feast, a party to celebrate him having his brothers again. This is what the Bible tells us. This is what the Bible teaches us. We are Christians. We are to represent God. We are to represent Christ. And that's why the Bible in the New Testament tells us that every day, each single day that we live here on earth, we are supposed to live in resemblance of Christ. We are supposed to show Christ in us. Mm-hmm. And what is Christ about? Christ is all about forgiveness. Christ is all about doing good to the people. Christ is all about forgiving. Mm-hmm. Remember, we were all sinners. The Bible tells us that we were enemies of Christ. We were enemies of God. But because God loved us so much, he brought us to him. He brought us to himself as his friends, as his close friends. Just like I shared the other day, back in the time of Eden, when Adam and Eve, before they sinned, they had a connection. They had a special connection with God. They could approach God at any time without anything giving them judging them, anything judging them. They could come to God at any time. But when they sinned, now God created a law that they had to give a sacrifice in order for God to show himself to them. And this was like a big deal to everyone. And many people could not afford buying a sacrifice in order for God to forgive them, in order for them to see God in their lives. But Jesus himself in heaven looking down, he was pity to the humans. He wanted to find a way for them to still get closer to God, a way that will not cost them, a way that will be at any time giving them access to God. And for him to do that, he had to come down. We are all precious children of God, brothers and sisters. We are all loved so much. We are all cared for so much. So he came down to die for each one of us. He came down to sacrifice himself so that you and I can get the connection that Adam and Eve had before they sinned. And now, because of what Jesus did, we can now freely go before God and see and feel and see the goodness of God. It was all because of Christ. It was all because of the goodness of God. And because of what Christ did, he tells us to be as he is. To be the same way. He is forgiving. He forgave us the sin that we could not pay. So why can't we forgive those that have sinned against us? In people that have sinned against us, we may count their sins, but our sins that Jesus paid on the cross, the Bible tells us they could not get counted. There were so many sins, but we were forgiven because of his sacrifice. Let's do the same. When someone wrongs you, don't pay them back with evil. Don't pay them back with evil. But instead, forgive them and reconcile. Be at peace with everyone. Be at peace with everyone. That's the will of God. And that's what God wants from each one of us. In any way that you are, in any place that you always go, whether it's school or whether it's at work, in every situation that you are in, always represent Christ. Always represent Christ. Christ is all about love. It's all about love. It's all about sacrifice. It's all about peace. It's all about the grace. We were all given grace. And let's do the same. Give grace whenever you have the chance. Amen.
Amen.
I don't know. I think I went